Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Thank you for listening to Your Working Life, my podcast series featuring thought leaders in the career and personal growth arena. Hey, I know you spend a significant portion of your life at work, so my goal is to provide you with tools, inspiration, and resources so you can enjoy your career and love your life. And I am thrilled to welcome back a very special guest and a dear friend to the show, Val Grubb. Val, welcome back.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, well, it's always a joy to have you on the show, but let me tell our amazing listening audience all about you. Valerie Grubb is founder of the consulting firm Val Grubb and Associates. She is an innovative, visionary operations leader with an exceptional ability to zero in on the systems, processes, and human capital issues hampering a company's success. And previously, she served as vice president of strategic operations at NBC Universal and played a key role in creating both Oxygen Media and IAC. And she is the author of the extraordinary book, if you haven't read it, get out there right now, called Planes, Canes, and Automobiles: Connecting with Your Aging Parents Through Travel, which published last year. But today, I'm thrilled to have her back for her brand new book, Clash of the Generations: Managing the New Workplace Reality. Val, you wrote this book for me, babe. There's so much talk about the multicultural sandbox, the multi-generational sandbox, and how people just are still struggling getting along with so many generations. But tell me, what was your impetus for writing the book?
It's exactly like you said, Caroline. I'm hearing from clients how difficult it is, and it's getting more challenging to manage employees. And being a good manager, having, been in the workforce for 2 plus decades, I hate to say, there's no more core opportunity for a company to distinguish itself out there than having great employees who are motivated, engaged, and really fired up about helping the company achieve its goals. And unfortunately, that all starts with the manager. I mean, who hasn't heard the old saying that people join companies, but they leave managers?
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. And that's more so now than ever before, because we have this generation that has arrived and has been on the scene for, a decade, 10 years. And they are much more inclined that if things aren't going well, they're not going to stick it out.
Right.
And they're going to go see and find and take the time to find something that really speaks to them. And I think that multi-generational challenges have really kind of bubbled up, if you will, that it's something that you can't really ignore anymore if you want your company to be successful.
I so agree, and we have more generations working side by side than we've ever had throughout history. And I think you're talking about this wonderful population of millennials, which is in 2020 going to be 50% of our workforce. And I think they are extraordinary. I will also say, with the caveat, that they are changing the way we work, and they're changing professional values in the workplace. And my sense is that's causing a bit of a rub.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, things we talk about and things we're continuing to talk about, things like work ethic, work-life balance. This is way more key to this generation. And remember that they've experienced their Gen X parents and boomer grandparents, or even boomer parents,
absolutely,
who just weren't home, that were really slaves to their company, if you will. And what did they get out of it? Probably now they may be downsized. And so, because the loyalty just isn't there.
Yeah.
When that's your influence of kind of growing up, how couldn't it come back and change your expectation on an employer? And oh, by the way, your expectation of your career. It used to be like it used to be 3 career changes. Now we're at 3 career changes in a lifetime. Now we're at 4 times that. And that's a general expectation of this millennial. They're not looking to your company. They don't think in terms of joining a company forever. They think in terms of being in a company for 2 or 3 years, and even that's a long term anymore. And then you kind of add that into the mix that, oh, by the way, boomers aren't out of the workforce.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gotten harder as the workplace is just so much more crowded with employees that are spanning many generations, because those seasoned workers just aren't retiring in the numbers that we expected for a variety of reasons. They enjoy the work, they want to be part of something, or they just financially, they need the money. So adding those seasoned workers, having them stay in the workforce much longer than expected, they're driving that employment age up. Then we've got, these 76 million millennials are in there. And oh, guess what? We still got those Gen X folks in there. So the workplace is crowded. It's just much more challenging to be a manager and be an effective manager than it ever has been in the past.
I find that the millennials have really changed the core set of professional values. My dad is a bit of a dinosaur in that when he retired, he had worked for one company for his entire career, but that wasn't unusual, right? For he's in his early 80s in his time, because loyalty was a thing. But it's pretty rare now. You mentioned how millennials are really job hopping. And there's even a new term, Val, I'm sure you talk about this in the book, this knowledge transfer, right? It used to be a red flag when people would leave a job within a year or 2 years. And for the millennials, it's common practice. They need that intellectual change and variety. And I think a lot of older, shall I say, whether they're Gen X or Boomer, recruiters and hiring managers are just trying to wrap their brains around this new custom.
My goodness, absolutely. And I'll tell you, when I look at resumes now, if I'm recruiting for a client, I'll tell you, if I see somebody if I see a millennial, if I see any employee, but if I see anybody who's been at a company, and certainly a millennial employee that's been at a company for 2 years, I got to talk to them, because they're crazy town that's loyalty.
Yeah, it is.
That's loyalty.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it still actually wouldn't even exclude me to come back and if, as I look at a resume and someone has been, moving jobs every 6 months, the first question that I would ask is not wrong. I wouldn't ask what's wrong with the employee. I would now ask that candidate, what are you looking for?
Yes.
What have these companies not provided you that you think that my company can? And so it's a whole different conversation, because all you have to do is you got to find what motivates them. You got to find what engages them. And the moment that you do that you find that formula and that recipe, you've got a loyal employee.
Yeah.
Millennials are no less loyal. They're just much more loyal to themselves. And that's all right. If you can tap into what's exciting to them, you've got somebody who's going to stick with you for a really long time. And you're going to get an incredibly smart and engaged, and somebody who's going to be much more of a team player than you've ever had with a Gen X or a Boomer. So there's a lot of really positive traits that this generation has. And it's your job as a manager to make sure that you tap into that.
I'm so glad you said that, and I knew you would. You're such an extraordinary executive coach and consultant and professional. And the reality is the millennials are an extraordinary population, and I see them often being maligned because they're misunderstood in the workforce. And you nailed it. They're just discerning, and frankly, they're not willing to suffer through a bad boss or a bad environment. And part of me says, cheers to you. They're looking for what works for them, and they're doing it well.
Completely agree. And let me say this, let me take a step back, that it's interesting because every time a new generation enters the workforce, it's like we take a step back.
Yeah.
So when Gen X first entered the workforce in the early 80s, most every news story proclaimed them as disrespectful cynics unwilling to embrace the country's traditional work ethic. I looked at the Washington Post. They were chiding Gen X with the headline, "Grow up, crybabies."
Wow.
Newsweek staffers, they decried Gen X as the whiny generation. Wow, how things have come back around.
Yeah.
Because we're saying the same thing about millennials. And I'm sorry, you're right, as a Gen X myself, I am slightly more inclined to put up with a bad boss because I'm also experienced enough to know they got a good chance of getting out of there.
Yeah.
Of either them moving on, them being canned, moving on to something else. So, it's just an adjustment every time a new generation comes into the office. And as we all know, change is hard, right?
So true. So true.
It takes time, particularly when it comes to something as difficult and, by the way, as esoteric as managing employees.
Right.
If you've been managing employees for a long time and you've been good at it, it's challenging to immediately start doing things differently because a younger generation comes in. And as a manager, you've typically had time to develop your formula for what works. That said, that's not the case anymore. Companies and managers just don't have that time, which is really where my book comes in, because the financial crisis kind of helped companies with turnover because employees were hunkering down. They were staying where they were really from all of the generations. But that's not so anymore. And if your younger generation is unhappy, they are way more willing to jump ship for another opportunity that makes them happier. And isn't that interesting? I can tell you when I was first starting, it was about money, cold, hard cash.
Yeah.
And that's not the case anymore. I think you alluded to that at the beginning of this podcast, that it's not just about money anymore for the millennial generation. It's about really liking what they do and feeling valued. So while change takes time to kind of change your management style, as a manager, you don't really have that luxury of figuring it out over the long term because the turmoil and the turnover is going to kill your productivity. And by the way, as a younger manager, you don't have that luxury either because you need all of your employees working at full capacity. So we talk about millennials jumping ship, but let's talk about employees staying in place and not being productive. That's not going to help a younger manager if you can't figure out how to engage and motivate employees of any age that works for you. That's really going to be the key to management success, is getting up to speed as quick as possible.
So Val, let me ask you to unpack that a little bit because we're seeing this cross-generational supervision, right? The millennial managing a veteran employee, not just the traditional top-down, older, wiser. I shouldn't say that in a negative way. I just mean the reality of someone being older with more life experience, managing a younger employee. But now we're seeing a lot of flip, right? So how do you advise the young millennial manager who might have older folks on their team?
It's always been a reality that employers bring in new blood to shake things up.
Sure.
And look, when I graduated college, when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, I managed at Rolls-Royce a 52 all-male union crew doing aircraft engine maintenance. The next closest person to me was 15 years my senior, and it only went up from there. So companies have been doing this. Really, the goal is to kind of get in there and sort of shake things up. And I've always had, and I can say that in my 2 decades of managing employees, I've always had someone working for me who was older than me. And what I found is I feel like that the stakes are higher. The stakes are higher because for millennials, for a couple reasons. Number one, they want to move up quick. That is one of their expectations, and I have no issues with that. The key is that they have to be prepared. As you move up, you don't want to be a lousy manager that everybody talks about how terrible you are. You actually want to be a great manager that's a great leader that does great things for your company and that great things happen for you personally. So wrapping your arms around how to manage more seasoned workers is most definitely kind of priority number one when you come in there. And lots of things I could suggest, but let me give you kind of my top 3 hit list.
Great.
First is seek their input. As a manager, understand you don't need to know everything. You just need to know where to find out the information. So use that experience of someone who's older than you to help you solve problems that are new to you. Then give them the credit. What you're doing is you're valuing the respect for the information and the knowledge that they have. And that's a great thing as a manager, because they're feeling like they're still part of the solution and not just being told how they should be responding or what they're going to do. So respect that knowledge, respect that respect that seasoned knowledge that they have, and use that. The wise manager, the smart manager, the best managers use that to their advantage, but then give them the credit to say, Susie solved this based on her experience. I can tell you, if you do nothing else, go in there with the attitude that I want everybody as part of the solution.
Nice.
The second piece I would say that I find to be a real struggle for folks is to respect everybody's working style. So if you're a millennial, chances are you love a team approach to problem solving. That's not necessarily the case for your Gen X or Boomer. So let them go off and brainstorm on their own. Give them that time to go brainstorm, solve. That doesn't mean that you won't check in, but it's not a generation that wants to sit around and brainstorm as a team. That's not how I function. If I'm given a problem, I need to go off in the corner and think about it and analyze and pull back from the reaches in my mind of what's worked, what's not. I can't have people talking around and throwing out ideas. I mean, occasionally that works. But if it's something really hardcore, I need my space. And as a manager, as a millennial manager, respect that. That doesn't mean you give me a month to go off and think on it, but certainly at least give me a little bit of time before you come back and say, okay, I'd love to hear more, hear your thoughts about where this is going. Now we can come back and start looking at perhaps doing things in teamwork, in more team-oriented approach. But please, as a millennial, have respect for my working style. And finally, and gosh, isn't this like the cornerstone of great management? Communicate often, communicate well. Rarely can people be great leaders if they can't communicate their vision, set expectations, and then coach and mentor employees to achieve their goals. So you really need to master that ability to communicate. And oh, by the way, communication is two-way. So ask your employees, ask all of your employees, how is this working for you? Is my style helping or hindering you do the job? And then allow that feedback. And if they say, gosh, you're killing my motivation, okay, tell me what I can do better that's going to come back and motivate you and have you excited about this project. And if they say, well, I want to go off and work for a week, and that's not acceptable to you, then say, well, can we compromise? That's a conversation. And now you're really getting into specifics about how best to manage that person as an individual. And I always strongly encourage managers of any age to understand that every person is an individual. So you need to find out what makes the style that makes that person tick and what's going to bring out the best in them, and then adapt your style to each one of those people. I've had employees who were the same age, same birthdays, and they were so wildly different, wildly different in their expectations of how they wanted to be managed. So don't make assumptions, have that conversation, and certainly have that conversation if you're new to managing. And then it doesn't mean that you have to accept it, but it certainly means that you have at least asked and you're both trying to accommodate so that you get what you need.
I think they really want to be heard and listened to. And frankly, that goes with all generations. And Val, I'm so grateful too that you said, look, millennials are not all alike. I think sadly they have been portrayed with this particular definition, and it's not accurate for every individual. Just like Gen X and the boomers after them, or before them, I should say, we are all unique as our own thumbprint. So thank you for that. You write about that so beautifully in the book. Let's talk about similarities. I chuckled as a fellow Gen Xer when you talked about the 1980s headlines that you researched. And, you know, the whippersnappers of the time, we were rebellious with our work ethic, and perhaps that was true compared to our boomer colleagues. But what are the similarities that we should be focusing on instead of thinking about how different we are?
I think at the core, and that's a great question, because at our core, when it comes to work, we're all pretty much the same. All workers want recognition for good work.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to feel valued and in the know on company happenings. Employees want tactful discipline by their boss. Everybody wants interesting and engaging work. We want growth opportunities. These themes really resonate across most employees. And the key is to figure out as a manager what motivates each individual employee. So, as an example, if I mentioned that everybody wants recognition for good work, but what does recognition mean to me, let's say?
Yeah.
Is it exposure to senior management? Is it more money? Is it a bigger title? Perhaps additional responsibilities or more learning opportunities? Taking the time to understand the difference in what motivates and engages each individual employee is really going to mark the difference between being a good manager who gets compliance from their employees in accomplishing tasks and a great manager who has a team of employees that are just as invested in the department and the company's success as the manager is. And I've been managing employees for 20 plus years, and I've still not found two who have had the same goals, the same professional desires. And I've found that by understanding what each person wants out of life, what each person wants out of this 8 to 10 hours they're going to spend with me, it doesn't mean, I could tell you that they're going to stay with me longer because they know that ultimately I care. And ultimately this has to work for both of us. And that is what I have found has really distinguished between a manager, or even a good manager, and somebody who comes back and is a great manager who has employees that are fighting tigers and running up that hill together.
Beautifully put. So Generation Z are now college freshmen around the world, and Val, you and I share Indiana University as one of our alma maters, so you are beloved to the IU alumni community. They have arrived on campuses all over the world, and just to define this audience for the folks listening, they're approximately 12 to 18, right? So they're going to be in the workforce as interns this summer and very soon in full-time capacity in a few years once they mint those degrees or graduate from high school. Very different than even the millennials. So what can we expect from Gen Z?
And isn't that funny? I mean, I've got a big grin that I know you can't see, but I hear millennials already, like, as they've gone back to their alma mater, they're like, oh, this new generation. It's like, you gotta be kidding me.
You're 30.
I know, exactly. It's just staggering to me. It's so fun and funny to hear it. The exasperation.
Yeah.
I think that they are everything. If you were afraid of the millennial generation, everything that you're afraid of is going to be magnified with Gen Z. And that is why you've got to figure out this puzzle piece of managing, because the global orientation, this tech savviness, this, the challenging to keep them engaged, that has certainly reached new heights.
Yeah.
My 5-year-old twin nieces know how to get on my phone and use it.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, look, I had lunch with my godniece last week, and I finally had to say to her, I really need you to put that phone down. Can you give me 20 minutes? And then you can check every time after that. And we had to compromise to 12. So everything, like I said, all of that attention to detail is certainly going to be a bit of a struggle. I think it's going to be an incredibly smart group.
Oh, yeah.
Because education is so important. Like now, there is no such thing as a summer vacation. These Gen Z didn't grow up with that. They grew up being in summer school. And so you're going to have a group that's incredibly book smart. Not one of them will have a job, or very rarely would any have had a job. So as millennials came in with kind of this lack of experience, Gen Z is just continuing to take it in that level. And so, like I said, figuring out this management piece, now's the time, because we're not going backwards. You're not going back to the things that were important to a Gen Z or a boomer. You got to really we've talked about differences, but just understand that being valued, to a Gen Z employee, that will have nothing to do with being in the office. That will have nothing to do with FaceTime. So FaceTime in the office. So we'll have to figure out those key performance metrics that you're going to hold this group to that have nothing to do with sort of more traditional means of management. Because I think it's actually going to drive managers to be better, to be honest.
I think so too. Yeah.
Oh, I completely agree. You really have to figure out what is great performance and what is great goal setting, and that's going to drive you to be better. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing, and it's not a bad thing for the world. That's why you're seeing much more, the traditional once a year performance eval. It's almost shocking to run across a company that does that.
Yeah. It's all about the stay interview, right? Why would you go? Yeah.
Exactly. The stay interview, and also it's that constant feedback. And millennials started it, Gen Z is going to demand it. I mean, you will not keep a Gen Zer. I mean, if we think that 6 months or staying a year is a long time, Gen Z is going to drive that even higher.
Well, I think it's exciting. It really do, because it will require us to be better communicators, better listeners, and as you mentioned, better collaborators and partners, and encourage us to compromise more. So I see it as a great opportunity, certainly a challenge, and I'm eager to see how it all plays out.
I would agree. And the great thing is that the cream of the crop of any generation, of any age, is going to rise to the top.
You got it.
And this is your opportunity. I always say when I go in to coach at a company on multi-generational issues, so boomers, Gen X, millennials, you've always been the top of the class. You've always been the top of the class. Why would you let this stand in your way? Be the best of the best at being able to manage cross-generationally. And it's amazing kind of once you throw down that gauntlet, how what initially looked like as a problem, then everything just turns and it's all about finding solutions.
Brilliantly put. And your book is Clash of the Generations, Managing the New Workplace Reality. So what's next, Val? 2 extraordinary books, very different topics. What's coming down the road for you?
Oh, there's always a book rumbling around in my head. My goodness, it's hard to keep it in check. So, I've written 2 nonfiction books, so I like to continue to challenge myself as well. So I'm thinking perhaps a fiction book should be up next. That said, I'm going to worry about that after Clash of the Generations, really, before starting that next book. I need to let this percolate a bit.
There you go. Enjoy the success. Val, you are extraordinary. I always cherish having you on the show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and expertise. The book is a must-read. I'm so excited to share it with my clients and with our global audience. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I absolutely love being here.
All right, my dear. Be well and take good care.
You as well.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Your Working Life, where my goal is to help you design your career destiny so it doesn't happen by default. Career and life satisfaction is possible, and it's time to embrace what you love doing so you can do more of it. The show is now available on iTunes, YouTube, Podbean, and Stitcher. I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Take good care.